And then Saturday afternoon, armed with 2 Hollywood stars from the movie fame, we went to Molenbeek, to a community center that glistens with the smiles of young children and roars not with riots, but with their laughter. Build a partnership, and they will come. We went to Tremolo for Father Damon, and during the Mass, I spoke quietly with royalty and with ministers. But as we unveiled the statue of Damien on television in front of thousands, we spoke loudly of Charleroi, of Molenbeek, and of our partnership with all. Yes, the conversation has indeed started. The people of Belgium and the people of the United States understand that this time we have to get it right on a meaningful economic recovery. We have to get it right on changing climate before it changes us. We have to get it right on Afghanistan and on Pakistan. They understand that we can never appear to compromise the principles we believe in for short-term gains, and thus we must work together to close the detention center at Guantanamo. Belgians and Americans understand and share a commitment to addressing the needs of the least advantaged people on the planet, particularly those in Africa. The conversation had begun. And in fact, although Michelle and I and my son had just recently arrived, our conversation actually started in January 2007, when I met a young African-American senator named Barack Obama for the first time. Up to that point in time, January 2007, the story was a familiar one. Poor boy makes good and good lawyer makes better. You kind of all know the story. My father had been a Holocaust survivor who had survived the war in Poland without being caught. He came to America in 1950 not knowing a word of English, but believing that land offered a better opportunity for his children than the land he had left offered for him. When he died when I was 16, I started working as a dishwasher and a waiter, and went through student loans to Columbia University and Harvard Law School. Graduating Harvard Law School, near the top of the class, I was able to get a clerkship on our U.S. Court of Appeals and then on the United States Supreme Court. From there, I went to the prestigious firm, took time off for the Special Assistantship for Counterintelligence and Counterterrorism to our FBI, and became a political advisor with the worst track record in American history. My first job was advancing Lee Hart, Gary Hart's wife. There is nothing like advancing the wife when it's revealed that the husband's been unfaithful. I had an equally stellar career right up to being on the brief in Gore versus Bush. One of the lawyers assigned to the case for Gore. We lost by 1 vote. Then the 2008 campaign started. And I was close to a dear friend of mine, then the governor from Virginia, now a senator from Virginia named Mark Warner. And we tested the water for 17 months as I practiced law. We traveled the nation, testing the theory that the candidate who could see a little further down the road would ultimately be more appealing than the candidate who remembered the last time they had been there. After 17 months on the campaign trail, with Mark clearly setting the world on fire, he was then had been on the cover of the New York Times Magazine with the cover saying the alternative to Hillary. He decided he was not having any fun, despite the fun I was having, and he quit the campaign. So my 2008 campaign ended for all time in October 2006. I swore I was done. I had had 17 months doing it. I was over and ended. So Evan Bayh called and I told him I was done, and John Kerry called and I told him I was done. And then one day in the last week of January 2007, I was at my desk and I got a phone call. I had never met Barack Obama, but he was on the line. And what he said was that he was due to go home that Monday evening at 9:30 to write his speech announcing for president to be read that next Saturday. But if I would come for an hour, he would stay till 10:30 and gladly spend the hour talking to me. Now, I didn't plan on working for him, but how could you really tell a man, why don't you go home at 9:30? So I went to deliver the message that I wouldn't be able to support him, that I was done. I never delivered that message. Rather, later that evening, after an hour with Senator Obama, I went home and told Michelle, 2 years before our election, that I had just met the President of the United States. that Barack Obama would certainly be the next president. Because if you spend an hour with Barack Obama, you realize the world can be a better place today than it was yesterday, and that tomorrow can be even better still. Michelle asked me whether I thought our country was ready to elect an African-American president. And I told her that, the entire time I had been with Barack, it never occurred to me that he was African-American. Vision and judgment knew no race. And that I believe that the U.S. finally understood that the problems that we face that unite us are far greater than any differences or prejudices that have previously divided us. And he has never disappointed me since. He's the man I say who has no blood pressure and whose suit never creases. I was with them in February 2008 in what I saw was the greatest speech I had ever seen delivered. What happened that night, if you'll recall, is after being way down in the polls in October of 2007, but knowing we could get there, Barack Obama had surprised and won in Iowa. And in the time between Iowa and New Hampshire, the polls showed us winning big, double digits. 12 points up in New Hampshire 2 days before the primary. We win New Hampshire. It's a 2-round knockout, and Barack Obama is the next president of the United States. Because right after New Hampshire, South Carolina, and we couldn't get beaten in South Carolina, and go 3-0 and it's all over. So 48 hours beforehand and 12 points up, the dream that seemed so improbable seemed so likely. So the plan was for the 60 of us who were in New Hampshire to wait in a tavern, because he was going to be speaking at a high school that had bleachers but no real seats. And as soon as the returns came in, he would come by the tavern, speak to the 60 of us. We'd all go over to the high school. He'd give his winning address, and we'd be off celebrating the victory in the presidency. And a funny thing happened on the way that night. The polls stayed open, the returns came in, and Barack Obama lost the New Hampshire primary. And in front of us in those hours, it had all crumbled. The 2 years of work, the certainty of the presidency, it had literally all crumbled. So 60 of us stood in that tavern, not knowing what to do or where to go, because the returns had gone late, and now the nightly news was on, and Obama had to get to that high school and make the speech. But we were told to wait, that he would make the speech in the gym, and he would come back and see us. He did, and if anyone wants to check on YouTube, his speech generally in New Hampshire that night was a wonderful speech. But then picture the scene at midnight in a cold New Hampshire day when Barack Obama went from thinking he was about to win the presidency to having seen it all crumble. And think about the 60 of us in that tavern. I was just disheartened. I couldn't even look up. And in came Barack, suit not creased, no blood pressure at all. And he strode to the mic at midnight, having rode that long day. And he said he would only speak briefly because we'd just all seen him on TV. And he had only 2 things to say. And the first one was, he wanted to thank us in his typical way. And of course, when Barack thanks you, he thanks you in paragraphs, and it was eloquent. But the second part was what I will always remember, what I call the greatest speech I've ever heard. Because Barack then said, this is going to sound like spin to all of you, and I assure you it's not. I am as disappointed as any of you. I'm disappointed to my core. But I had been talking to David Plouffe all week about a problem we were facing. We had won so easily in Iowa, and then came to such a big lead in New Hampshire. The win was going to come too easy. And the first minute we stumbled in the White House, the headlines would be, he had rode the era of good feeling. It had been the reconciliation of race relations. It had been a wave that came over Americans. They didn't know what they were doing. He said we were winning so easily that we would win, but not be able to govern. And never forget, he said, that what we're doing has nothing to do with winning an election. It has to do with governing and changing the world. And the darndest thing is, as I looked into his eyes, he believed it. So when I saw inside that man that night, I knew we could do no wrong. I knew he would win, and I knew he would change the world.